Well, I'm sort of confused by the whole thing, really, if I'm totally honest, because it's becoming very sort of technical with what's going on. You know, we know the situations. We know Conor Benn failed a test in July of last year. And we know he failed a second test in the September of last year for the same drug, clomiphene. And yeah, we was waiting the outcome of that, and now he's got some new people, some scientists in as well, to talk about how that's got in there, the amount that it's in his system. And I don't think they're denying that it's in his system, but they're denying that he actually took it. Is that right, Simon?
You seem quite impressed by them, though, on Monday. Is that right?
I was impressed with the presentation of the fellow they've got now to be their mouthpiece, because he's quite a formidable man, and there's an irony about this, because if we hadn't have gone through this process of Conor snarling and sneering and getting agitated and irritated and telling the British Boxing Board of Control and UKAD to go and do one, and doing the journey that he's been on, then he may well have gotten in front of the British Boxing Board of Control earlier, and then found himself in a way of a 4-year ban, because he wouldn't be able to think his way through the conundrum that he's got, because the allegations that were made, and his defence was that it was contamination at UKAD's end, at VADA's end in this instance. And that argument was the one that he advanced to the WBC. But that argument wasn't right, because what they're suggesting via this new approach is, first of all, that the media approach for a grown-up individual representing, because the argument was being made by this Rennie Carriol was that he was owed a duty of care, and that the fact that he failed these drugs tests, no one rallied around him, no one looked after him, they threw him to the lions. And I kind of agree and disagree in equal measure, because I would ask him who he'd think should look after him. It can't be the drug testing agency, because their job is to provide a result, and he then has the opportunity to be able to defend his case by going in front of the people that are accusing him of failing a drugs test and dealing with it. He chose not to do it. The people that should have been looking after him, perhaps, were the people that were profiting from him, the people that were trying to profit through him, the Eddie Hearns of the world and the Kalle Saulons of the world, that should have had something more meaningful to say than what they did say. Now, and the guys that he got around advising him to go and have pitched battles with everybody and get very aggressive about things. Now, this guy is a smooth operator, this Rennie Carriol, and what they've gone is they've gone and looked at it, right? If we believe from the premise that he hasn't doped, and the WBC gave him an outcome, they actually said there's a possibility that you could have had eggs in your diet, and if you've had eggs in your diet, we know that eggs potentially in America contain this drug clomiphene, and on that basis, there's a distinct possibility if your diet included it, that's how it got into your system, right? Everybody laughed at it, and Conor himself refuted it and went, that's not what I said. He did it on Piers Morgan. And everyone universally accepts now that the interview that Conor did on Piers Morgan was great for Piers Morgan, but was dreadful for him.
It's a PR disaster,
and
that's what it is.
And anybody that had any sense was looking after this boy, including his father, should have been saying to him, for the love of God, either get your story straight and be clear in what you're saying, or keep well away from these situations, because this is red top stuff that's going to undo you. Now what you've got guys saying, if we believe, if we start from the premise that we believe that you are telling the truth, then we need to look medically behind how the reality of clomiphene can have got in your system. And what they've done is they've looked at this particular construct of Conor's body, from the production of estrogen through to the idea that metabolites, which are things that are produced in the body to absorb certain things, whether it's lactic acid or products like that, or natural body reactions like that. And what they've ascertained is that the way that Conor's body reacts to this particular substance produces a level of metabolites which cannot be commensurate with someone that's taken it from a drug sample or drug or doping, irrespective of where they are in that cycle. Because a lot of people will say, doesn't matter. It could be out of his cycle. It could have been doping and he's out of his cycle. They're looking at clinical evidence that they believe they can stand up scientifically to suggest that the ingestion of, and the way that his body has reacted to clomiphene coming in from the system, the metabolites it's produced, cannot have come from a doping regime. So that will be a clinical argument that UKAD have to counter.
You and your position on this is maybe slightly different to others, and certainly different to the camp from Conor Benn's perspective, that they're spending a lot of time, energy and money in order to try and justify this behaviour. Where do you stand on it?
Well, listen, obviously he wants to clear his name, and that's what we want. We all wanted that for Conor Benn, to be able to clear his name and move on. But as we, where we stand is the two failed tests, July and September, and it is strict liability. That's what a boxer knows, that it's strict liability, what goes into your body.
You have to be accountable for.
That's
an unfair characterisation, by the way.
That's where we're at.
That's an unfair characterisation, because he's not any different from anyone else, Spencer, and never has been. What he has been is completely down the line of saying, if you're innocent, prove it.
No, he's different from, I suppose, the Conor Benn camp, which is the point.
Well, no, the Conor Benn camp have always wanted to prove their innocence, but wanted to go about a different route.
Yeah, I'm just neutral.
So what Spencer and I have said, and Spencer specifically being a boxer has more jeopardy in the conversation because he'll get blackballed and vilified for speaking out of turn, is if you're not guilty, prove it. We all want you to prove it. That's all you've ever wanted.
That's it.
And the reality of how Conor's handled it has been dreadful, and he's not been encouraged to do it differently. And I suspect now this guy Rennie Carroll, who's also working on Conor's mindset, because he tells us that Conor's been in a dreadful place mentally, and ultimately he needs to get him back into a certain frame of mind, which he's now got him to. And the bottom line is now we have to look at the reality of the fairness of this. Because people are going to characterise what he and I have said, and it's absolute crap. Neither one of us has said we wanted this kid banned. What all of us have said is handle yourself better and deal with the fact that you've got to answer to UKAD. You cannot duck around it. You can't go fight in Saudi Arabia. You can't put other people's careers in jeopardy. You have to clear your name. Right? You have to do that, and you have to do it properly and get proper people around you, not highfalutin lawyers like Mike Morgan that are going to find technicalities to get you out from underneath. Get your name cleared, son. The problem is that the boxing world is slightly unfair, because if this strict liability is to be adhered to, Conor still finds himself in a position, even if they can justify medically, that they can prove scientifically that this can only have come in via an ingestion, right? Then the next thing is he's got to prove where he got those eggs from. Right, because ultimately we've already understood that the only place that puts clomiphene into eggs is America, right? But we have also heard from this Rennie Carroll that actually he went to Italy and he had some eggs, not Conor, but himself, that contained clomiphene when he was in Italy. And we know that Conor traces around, has been around Europe. Here's the thing. If medically they prove the fact that this cannot have been brought in by a doping regime, should strict liability then extend to Conor having to prove where he bought the bleeding eggs from?
Yeah.
Because the answer to that should possibly be in a reasonable, sensible world. No, it shouldn't.
Bear in mind the level of protein that a boxer is expected to take on, and therefore eggs becomes a big, heavy part of everybody's diet. Why has this never happened before?
Great question. Great question. You know, I mean, look, they've only ever found clomiphene in eggs in South America. Yeah, now Simon said to me that they have actually found it in Italy as well. I don't know the proof behind that. I don't know.
It depends how regularly you're being tested, as a matter of course. But I mean, Conor only got tested for the clean boxing campaign, clean boxing regime, because he had to get inside the top 15 of the WBC, and as a result of that, he then was forced to have a test.
But how do we explain July and September? I mean, that's a few months apart.
Well, absolutely. But the fact of the matter is if the scientific evidence that they're able to produce is compelling, then UKAD have to listen to it. If UKAD can then make scientific sense of it, then you've got a situation where a substance has been introduced on a banning regime, needs to have a second level of testing beneath it. Because there's one test to fail a test and say, well, clomiphene's present in his system. Right. Next thing is advice about don't eat eggs. Don't eat eggs that are bought in America. Check your food source on everything, because eggs, clomiphene's present in eggs. So that's the next piece of advice that has to be given. And the third thing that has to come underneath that is, okay, then there needs to be another raft of testing underneath the drug testing and the failed test to say, how did it get in your system?
So basically, we're looking at changing the whole doping system.
And then you get into the situation of how you can start enforcing. I think what they were trying to do on Monday or Tuesday when they came in was create a narrative. They were saying that we haven't even heard from UKAD. Well, you won't hear from UKAD because you'll get your opportunity to present your evidence when the UKAD hearing that Conor's not wanted to have for the last 12 months happens. And if your evidence is compelling, and it sounds prima facie compelling, but none of us are scientists. None of us sit here study the anatomy and the way that people metabolize things. We're taking it at face value from doctors and so-called experts. It'll be interesting to see how this manifests itself now, because there is now a reasonable, structured argument to support Conor's position that he's maintained all along. And you've also now got a proper media-facing individual talking on behalf of Conor, looking after him like other people should have done.
Well, Eddie Hearn's pretty confident that Ben will take on Eubank in a few months' time. Once the position is cleared up, he said, with UKAD, we would like to do this fight in the UK in September, and I think there's a very good chance that could happen. We will wait and see.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.